quiet town of Milton. A black mechanic, quiet and reserved, living under watchful, cautious eyes. One day an old man shows up to sell his beloved Harley to save his sick granddaughter. The mechanic quietly reaches out to the Hells Angels for help. 2 weeks later, 200 motorcycles roll into town, bringing a surprise so powerful it leaves the entire town speechless. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The afternoon sun baked the cracked sidewalks of Milton, Ohio, the kind of small town that looked quiet on the surface but always had eyes watching. Rows of modest houses with peeling paint lined the narrow street, and the faded Main Street sign rattled gently in the wind above the only gas station for miles. Across from it sat Henderson's garage, a squat one-story building with grease-stained windows and an old Coca-Cola sign faded nearly white from years of sun. Mason Lewis leaned against the open garage door, wiping his hands with a dirty rag, watching the world roll by. Or more like watching the same 3 people walk past with their grocery bags and sideways glances. At 31, Mason had been working here just under a year, but he already knew how folks in Milton looked at him. Being the only black mechanic in town had that effect. Mrs. Landry crossed the street, clutching her purse tighter as she passed the shop, her eyes flicking to Mason like she expected him to lunge at her. 2 teenage boys on bikes rolled by a few minutes later, laughing loud enough for Mason to hear one of them mutter, "Wonder how long till he strips a car in there." Same jokes, same looks, same small-town small minds. Mason wasn't new to it. Born and raised in Cleveland, he'd seen worse. But out here? It wasn't the kind of hate that screamed in your face. It was quieter. The long stares, the fake smiles, the way the old-timers at the diners stopped talking when he walked in for coffee. He tossed the rag onto the workbench just as the low rumble of a motorcycle drifted down the street. Not just any bike. Mason recognized the sound of a Harley engine from a mile away, years of wrenching on bikes, tuning his ear to every piston stroke. A moment later, an old Heritage Softail rolled up to the curb, its chrome dulled with age but still gleaming in all the right places. The rider, a wiry old man with thinning gray hair poking out from under a ball cap, killed the engine and sat still for a moment, eyes fixed on the shop like he wasn't sure he really wanted to be here. Mason took him in. Maybe late 60s, lean, skin weathered like worn leather, khakis and a tucked-in flannel shirt that screamed middle-class respectability, the kind of man who probably owned half the businesses in town, or at least thought he should. The man climbed off the bike stiffly, walking like his knees had seen better days. His hand drifted to the tank of the Harley, lingering there for a second too long, like he was saying goodbye. Mason stayed by the garage door, giving him space but keeping his eyes sharp. The man finally looked up, his face lined but his eyes steady, blue-gray and tired. "You work here?" the old man asked, voice rough but steady. "Yeah," Mason replied, nodding toward the bay. "Need service?" The man hesitated, his gaze drifting back to the bike. "Nah, selling." His voice caught slightly on the word. Mason raised an eyebrow. "Classic like that? Shame." The man didn't smile. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Name's Walter. Walter Briggs. You Henderson?" Mason shook his head. "I'd just fix 'em. Rick's inside." Walter nodded but didn't move right away. His hand went back to the bike, fingertips brushing over the faded tank decal. Mason recognized that look, the quiet grief, the way people touched machines like they were holding on to someone, not something. It wasn't hard to figure. The Harley was old but taken care of. This wasn't some rich guy flipping toys. This bike meant something. Mason glanced at the sidewalk. Across the street, Mrs. Landry still stood by her porch, arms crossed, watching him. Watching Walter, too, but not the same way. Mason could read it plain as day. Old Man Briggs fit the town. Mason never would. He turned back to Walter, keeping his voice neutral. "I'll grab Rick." Walter just nodded, eyes never leaving the Harley. As Mason walked inside, the weight of the man's stare and the silent judgment from across the street stuck with him like motor oil under his fingernails. Something about today didn't feel routine, and Mason's gut, trained by years of reading people, told him the story behind that Harley wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. Mason leaned against the workbench in the back of the shop, arms crossed over his grease-streaked shirt, eyes drifting toward the front window, where Walter Briggs still hovered near his Harley. The old man stood there like he couldn't quite let go, his hand resting on the seat, thumb tracing the edge of the leather, like it held more than just wear and tear. Mason had seen that look before. Not often, but enough to recognize it. The look of someone about to lose the last piece of something that mattered, and not by choice. Rick Henderson finally emerged from his cluttered office, pushing his reading glasses up onto his head, a thin folder in one hand. "Guy outside?" Rick asked casually, not looking up. "Yeah," Mason replied, watching through the window as Walter paced once, hesitated, then reached into his pocket for what looked like a folded envelope. "Selling the Softail." Rick whistled low, flipping the folder open as he walked toward the front. "Damn shame. Those '88 Heritage models are hard to come by clean these days." "Doesn't look like he wants to let it go," Mason muttered, more to himself than to Rick. But Rick heard him. "Nobody sells their old Harley 'cause they want to," Rick replied without missing a beat, pushing the front door open with his shoulder. Mason stayed by the window, wiping his hands on a rag he didn't need anymore, watching the conversation unfold just outside. Walter handed over the envelope, his jaw tight, shoulders pulled back, and the kind of forced pride Mason had seen in men trying to mask desperation. Rick flipped through a few papers, nodding occasionally, his expression neutral but respectful. Mason couldn't hear everything through the glass, but a few words drifted in when the door cracked open. "Granddaughter, medical bills, insurance will cover it." Mason's chest tightened. He set the rag down, stepping closer to the door without thinking, drawn by the quiet weight behind those words. It wasn't nosiness. It was that same itch in his gut, the part of him that always clocked when life was about to remind someone how unfair it could be. 7 years old. Walter's voice was quieter now, almost cracking, but Mason caught it clear. "She's all I've got left. Her mom's gone. My son's doing what he can, but—" His hand gestured vaguely, as if the weight of it all was too heavy to put into words. Rick nodded, flipping the paperwork shut with a sigh. "I get it, Walter," he said, his voice steady but softer now. "We'll make this clean. I got a couple collectors out west might buy." Walter gave a small, tired smile. "Appreciate it." Mason stayed inside, watching through the dusty glass, the back of his throat tightening in that familiar, bitter way. It wasn't just the bike. It never was. That old man wasn't selling chrome and steel. He was selling memories. Selling the last damn connection to something good, because America's healthcare system didn't leave him a choice. The front door jingled as Rick stepped back in, tucking the envelope under his arm. "Well," he said, meeting Mason's eyes for a brief moment, "guess we got ourselves another piece of history headed for auction." Mason didn't answer. His gaze drifted to Walter, still standing by the Harley, fingers ghosting over the handlebars, his shoulders slumped now, the fight gone from his posture. Mason's jaw clenched. He'd seen this play out 100 different ways growing up in Cleveland. Hard-working folks, good folks, forced to pawn their lives just to keep the lights on or a kid breathing. Only difference was, back in the city, people expected to struggle. Out here in Milton, everyone dressed it up nicer, called it bad luck or tough choices. But it was the same old story, only quieter, only lonelier. "You all right?" Rick asked, pulling Mason from his thoughts. Mason shrugged, wiping his palms on his jeans. "Yeah," he lied, then tilted his chin toward the window. "That bike? It means something to him?" Rick followed his gaze. "Probably everything," Rick replied simply. "Married 30, 40 years. They rode that thing cross-country every summer from what I heard. Wife passed, cancer maybe, now the kid's sick. You do the math." Mason let out a breath through his nose, the knot in his chest tightening. He'd lost count how many friends from the old neighborhood got swallowed up by hospitals and bill collectors. It never got easier to watch. Walter finally turned away from the Harley, his shoulders squared with forced dignity, walking stiffly down the sidewalk past the shop window. His eyes flicked toward Mason's for a half-second, enough to register recognition, then kept going. But there was something in that brief glance, a quiet crack beneath the surface. Pride fighting against fear, a man swallowing his last shred of self just to keep someone he loved above water. And maybe, just maybe, Mason saw a piece of himself there. "Hey," Rick called over his shoulder as he sorted papers at the front counter. "You mind locking up the back when you're done? I'm heading to the title office to process this." Mason didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on the street long after Walter disappeared around the corner. "Yeah," Mason finally replied, voice low. "I got it." But as the shop quieted, the hum of the Harley's engine long gone, Mason stood there, arms folded, staring at the empty space outside where the bike had been. And for the first time in a long while, he couldn't shake the feeling that all of this, wasn't right. The old man, the sick kid, the damn system squeezing people dry. None of it was fair. The world didn't need another speech. It didn't need more small-town whispers behind closed doors. But maybe, just maybe, it needed someone to pay attention. Mason turned back toward the bay, the gears already turning in his mind. He didn't have much. Just a toolbox, a busted phone, and a Hells Angels forum login he rarely used. But it might be enough. He wasn't sure what he was going to do yet. But watching Walter Briggs walk away, Mason knew one thing for sure. He wasn't done with this story. Not yet. The ceiling fan hummed above Mason's head, spinning slow and lazy in the stale air of his one-bedroom apartment. The cheap blinds rattled against the window frame every time a car passed on the street outside, not that there were many this time of night. Milton went quiet after 9, the kind of quiet that never sat right with him. Too much space for your thoughts to creep in. He sat on the edge of his worn-out couch, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the screen. The blue glow lit up the tired lines under his eyes, the faint smudge of grease still under his fingernails from the shop earlier. He hadn't been able to shake the image of Walter Briggs walking away from the garage. Stiff shoulders, eyes heavy with that quiet kind of grief Mason recognized all too well. It wasn't the first time he'd seen someone fold under the weight of the system. Wouldn't be the last, but this time, it felt different. Maybe it was how out of place the old man looked, pacing outside the shop, pressed khakis and faded flannel like armor against the world. Or maybe it was that damn bike, a machine carrying 3 decades of memories, traded for a number on a medical bill. Mason rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling slow. The news was always full of stories like this. Hell, his own family wasn't immune. His mom had worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on when his older brother got sick, hustled every corner of Cleveland to scrape together co-pays and prescriptions. Mason still remembered the late-night arguments, the eviction notices, the quiet sobs his mom tried to muffle behind a closed door. It always came down to the same damn thing. If you didn't have the money, love wasn't enough. His phone vibrated once, pulling him from the spiral. A notification from the Hells Angels Ohio chapter forum, buried beneath old threads about ride routes and swap meets. His thumb hovered over it for a second. He wasn't the most active member. Half the guys still looked at him sideways for being the quiet black mechanic who showed up to a few barbecues and kept to himself. But the forum? That was different. Behind screens and usernames, people talked, real. Mason opened a new post window, staring at the blinking cursor. For a long moment he just sat there, thumb tapping against the side of his phone. What the hell was he even doing? He wasn't the type to stir the pot, especially not out here, where people still acted like they were stuck in 1963. But the memory of Walter's eyes, proud, cracked, desperate, wouldn't leave him alone. Screw it. His thumbs moved faster than his brain could second-guess. Met a man today. Name's Walter Briggs. Runs that hardware store by the bank. Some of y'all probably know him. Real small town, straight-laced type. 69. Lost his wife a few years back. Only thing he's held on to all these years is his '88 Heritage Softail. Beautiful bike. The kind you don't sell unless the world's falling apart. Today he sold it. Mason paused, staring at the words on the screen. He could almost hear his brother's voice in his head. No one gives a damn, Mace. People got their own problems. But this wasn't about sympathy. It was about principle. About not looking the other way for once. He kept typing. Didn't do it for kicks. Didn't do it for cash. Did it 'cause his granddaughter's sick. Rare autoimmune thing. 7 years old. Needs meds the insurance won't touch. Man's working himself ragged, son's doing doubles, and still ain't enough. So now the bike's gone, memories, his wife's last gift. All of it. Gone so the kid's got a fighting chance. Mason's chest tightened as he read the words back to himself. It sounded like some story off a Hallmark special, neat and packaged, except it wasn't neat. It was bitter, raw, and soaked in the same quiet injustice that never made the news. He hesitated for a beat, then finished. I ain't saying throw 'em a parade, but folks like that, they're the reason we ride. Loyalty, sacrifice, family first. Maybe we ought to show 'em he's not alone. His thumb hovered over the post button. One last breath. Then he tapped it. The screen refreshed. His words were out there now, floating in the digital void. He half expected silence. A few pity likes. Maybe the regulars would scroll past, caught up in engine specs and ride schedules. But the first reply popped up less than 2 minutes later. Deco Hay. Shit, that's heavy. You got pics of the bike? Then another. Road Queen 61. Poor man. Where's he at? We help our own. Then more. Comments stacking fast. Some asked questions. Others shared their own stories. Sick kids, lost spouses, medical bills that bled them dry. Mason's eyes scanned the thread as it grew, the knot in his chest loosening just a fraction. They weren't looking the other way. Messages poured in from members across Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, offers of help, names of mechanics, questions about the buyer. Someone mentioned tracking the Harley down. Another floated the idea of building a replica, a tribute. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was there. A quiet, stubborn hum of community. Mason leaned back on the couch, phone resting on his chest, staring up at the ceiling fan spinning slow. He didn't expect miracles. He wasn't naive enough to think a post could fix everything. But tonight? It was enough to know he wasn't alone in seeing how wrong it was, that good people still had to sell pieces of their life just to keep their families breathing. His phone buzzed again. A private message this time. Dekinth, good on you, man. Keep us posted. We ain't letting this one slide. Mason let out a slow breath, the first real one in hours. For the first time that night, the silence in his apartment didn't feel so heavy. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The first thing Mason noticed wasn't the sound, it was the vibration. A low, steady hum rattling the old window panes of Henderson's garage just after lunch on a quiet Saturday. For half a second, he thought it was thunder rolling in from the west, maybe one of those heavy summer storms that blanketed Ohio this time of year. But then the hum deepened. Turned rhythmic, turned familiar. He stepped outside, the sunlight sharp against his eyes, and the sound hit him square in the chest. The unmistakable rumble of Harley engines. Not one or two, dozens, maybe more. The street that normally sat still and sleepy had come alive with chrome and leather. Headlights gleamed in the afternoon sun as bike after bike turned onto Main Street, exhaust pipes snarling, engines growling in perfect, thundering unison. It wasn't a rally. It wasn't some planned town event. Mason knew instantly. This was for Walter. The procession rolled past the gas station, past the diner, slowing as they neared Briggs Hardware on the corner. Locals had already begun to spill out onto their porches, some craning their necks, others fumbling for phones to record the sight. The chatter rippled through the sidewalks, confused, curious, skeptical. But Mason wasn't confused. He knew damn well what this was. He pushed away from the garage, slipping into the growing crowd near the hardware store. The bikes kept coming, black, silver, red. Riders young and old, women and men, patched and unpatched. The familiar winged skull of the Hells Angels gleamed on several jackets. Some folks in town stiffened at the sight, but nobody said a word. The sound was too overwhelming. The message was too clear. A matte, black flatbed truck followed at the end of the procession, creeping down the street like it carried something sacred. A long, tarp-covered shape sat strapped to its bed. Mason's pulse kicked up as realization settled in. Walter stood frozen in the doorway of his shop, a half-unpacked box of light bulbs forgotten in his hands. His face? The kind of face hardened by years running a small business, dealing with customers, taxes, suppliers, was stripped bare now. His jaw slackened, his eyes wide, confused. He wasn't the only one. People had stopped dead in their tracks. Old Mr. Connor from the post office, Mary Ann from the coffee shop, even the high school kids who usually avoided eye contact with Mason, all of them staring, phones halfway raised, mouths hanging open. The lead bike, a silver road glide, peeled off and rumbled up onto the curb. The rider, a broad-shouldered woman with sun-leathered skin and sharp gray eyes, swung off the seat with practiced ease. Her Hells Angels patch glinted red and white against her black vest as she approached Walter. "Walter Briggs?" she called, voice cutting through the low idle of engines still rumbling behind her. Walter nodded, his hand still resting dumbly on the box of bulbs. "Yeah," he managed. The woman smiled faintly, then turned, motioning toward the truck. Mason watched as a few riders moved to the flatbed, unfastening the tarp with care. The cover peeled away, and even Mason, who knew what was coming, felt his breath catch. It was beautiful. Nation. A 1988 Heritage Softail, same year, same model as Walter's old bike, but this one gleamed like it had just rolled off the factory floor, chrome polished to a mirror shine, the deep navy paint flawless under the sun. But it wasn't just the condition that stopped Mason cold, it was the details. Hand-to-cold leather saddlebags with scenes of winding country roads. The gas tank painted with delicate script, for family, for the ride. And stitched across the seat, in looping, careful letters, Evelyn. Walter staggered forward a step, the box of bulbs forgotten, his hand lifting toward the bike like he didn't quite believe it was real. His throat worked, but no words came out. The woman's voice softened. "Mr. Briggs, word got around. Your story, your choice, it reached a lot of folks. Folks who've been where you've been. Folks who know what it means to lose everything but still stand up for your family." She paused, then added, "We figured you deserve to ride again. You and your girl." The crowd had gone dead silent. Even the engine seemed to quiet, a low hum beneath the words. Mason stood at the edge, arms crossed, heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't organized this alone, not even close, but seeing it play out, seeing Walter's shock melt into something raw and overwhelming, made every restless night worth it. Walter's eyes darted across the crowd, finally landing on Mason. Their gazes locked for a long moment, and Mason saw it. Recognition. Understanding. Gratitude buried beneath layers of pride and quiet pain. Walter gave the slightest shake of his head like he still couldn't process it, but his eyes shimmered with something dangerously close to tears. The rider stepped aside, giving Walter space. His steps were hesitant at first, boots scuffing the concrete as he approached the Softail. His hand hovered over the handlebars, then settled there, fingers trembling slightly as they traced the custom stitching on the seat. "My wife's name," Walter whispered, voice cracking. The woman smiled softly. "We know." A lump rose in Mason's throat, unexpected and unwelcome. He shoved his hands deeper into his jacket pockets, forcing himself to stay steady. Around him, townsfolk whispered, some still suspicious, others clearly moved, their faces a mix of awe and quiet guilt. They'd watched Walter pack that bike away. They'd whispered behind closed doors. Now they were seeing what real community looked like, loud, unapologetic, undeniable. One of the younger riders approached Mason, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You the one who posted it, right? On the forum?" Mason just nodded, the words sticking in his throat. The kid grinned. "Good call, man. This is what it's about." As Walter finally swung a leg over the seat, settling onto the bike like muscle memory never left, Mason felt the knot in his chest loosen for the first time in days. It wasn't over. Hell, life never really was. But right now? Right now they'd made it a little less lonely. And that mattered. The late afternoon sun dipped behind the row of houses on Willow Street, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement as Mason eased his bike to a stop in front of Walter Briggs' place. The familiar old hardware store sat quiet, its faded sign creaking gently in the breeze, but all Mason's focus landed on the small brick garage tucked beside the house. It wasn't empty anymore. The big white transport van from California still sat at the curb, engine cooling with quiet clicks as two men in shipping uniforms wheeled down the metal ramp. Between them, secured with padded straps and gleaming under the sunlight, was Walter's original '88 Heritage Softail, the one he'd sold, the one everyone thought was gone for good. Mason killed his engine, climbing off his bike as the shipping guys lowered the Harley onto the driveway. Across the yard, the front door creaked open and Walter stepped out, Jenna skipping at his side. Her small hand clutched his fingers, her face bright beneath a mop of curly brown hair, legs wobbling just slightly, the lingering effects of illness visible, but her smile wide enough to cut through it all. Walter's eyes landed on the bike, and for a long moment he didn't move. His weathered face shifted from surprise to disbelief, and then something softer. His hand tightened gently around Jenna's as they crossed the yard. The taller of the shipping guys nodded toward Mason. "You the one signed off on this?" Mason shook his head, jerking a thumb toward Walter. "Nah, this one's his, been his all along." The man grinned faintly, pulled a clipboard from under his arm. "Collector out west heard the story. Said some things don't belong in showrooms, paid shipping himself. Bike's yours now, sir." Walter's jaw clenched as he took the clipboard with a slow, careful hand. He signed his name, the pen trembling just slightly in his grip. Jenna hovered close, her small fingers curling around his wrist, curious eyes drifting between the bike and Mason. Once the van pulled away, the quiet settled over them again. Mason shoved his hands into his jacket pockets, watching Walter circle the old Harley like a man seeing a ghost. His fingers traced the faded tank decal, the tiny scuff marks along the chrome, the custom leather grips. It wasn't as shiny as the tribute bike. Didn't sparkle under the sun, but it carried a different weight. The kind time didn't polish away. Walter let out a breath, low and shaky. "She came back," he murmured, almost to himself. Mason shrugged lightly. "Reckon good things have a way of finding their way home, sometimes." Walter's eyes lifted, meeting Mason's with quiet, honest gratitude. No pride now, no stubborn walls, just two men. One older, worn down by life's sharp edges, and one younger, carrying his own scars, both standing in the same damn storm for once. "Thank you," Walter said, his voice rough but steady, "for all of it." Mason shook his head, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Wasn't just me, old man. Whole lot of folks had your back. I just lit the fuse." Jenna tugged at Walter's shirt, pointing toward the garage. "Papa, can we put 'em both inside now? They belong together." Walter looked down at her, his features softening in that way only grandparents seem to manage. He nodded, ruffling her curls gently. "Yeah, sweetheart, we can." The three of them moved to the garage, its wide door already rolled open. Inside, the newly built tribute Softail sat gleaming under the dull workshop light, every inch polished to perfection. A new helmet, Jenna's size, hung beside the old hooks, where Evelyn's jacket still swayed faintly from earlier. Walter wheeled the original bike inside, parking it beside the new one with slow, careful hands, as if afraid the whole scene might vanish if he blinked too fast. Mason stayed back near the doorway, his boots scuffing the concrete as he watched. For a long minute, no one spoke. The two bikes sat side by side, one carrying the weight of memories, the other built with the hands of strangers who understood loss, understood family, understood what the road meant when everything else was stripped away. Jenna slipped off her sneakers, climbing gently onto the new bike's seat. Her tiny fingers brushed the engraved stitching along the leather, her grandmother's name shining soft under the bulb light. She grinned, wide and gap-toothed, looking toward Mason. "You think Grandma can ride with us now?" Mason's throat tightened unexpectedly. He forced a small, crooked smile. "Pretty sure she never stopped." Walters stepped beside him, arms crossed, eyes drifting from the bikes to his granddaughter, then back toward the quiet street outside. His voice dropped, low and sure. "I used to think it was just me against the world, you know? You lose enough, bury enough, it's easy to forget how many folks got your back, even strangers." Mason nodded, shoulders loosening, the heavy knot in his chest easing. "Ain't no one gets through this alone, not for long." The sun slipped lower behind the rooftops, casting a soft orange glow across the garage floor. The hum of distant engines echoed faintly in the air, not loud now, not like the day the riders came rolling in. But it was enough to remind Mason what they'd built, what they'd rebuilt. Walter moved toward the workbench, pulling down the two helmets, one adult, one child size, hanging them carefully side by side, the space between them gone now. No more empty hooks, no more empty garage. Jenna swung her legs over the seat, giggling quietly. "Can we go for a ride soon?" she asked, looking between them with wide, hopeful eyes. Walter smiled, the lines around his mouth deeper now, but his eyes brighter. "Yeah," he promised softly. "Tomorrow. You, me, and Grandma wherever the road takes us." Mason watched the quiet strength settle back into the old man's shoulders, and felt, for the first time in a long while, like maybe the world wasn't so broken after all, just cracked in places. And cracks, they let the light in. As he slipped out of the garage and onto the quiet street, Mason fired up his bike. The engine rumbled steady beneath him, the road stretching wide and open ahead. Yeah, the town wasn't perfect, the world wasn't either, but tonight, the garage was full again. And so was Mason's heart. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.